So, welcome to another special edition of Morning Money Conversations with Stef, Drew, and Ray. You can catch us on every second Wednesday of the month at 10:15 a.m. specifically. And I'm joined again by my awesome two co-hosts, Stefan and Ray. Stefan is an award-winning mortgage broker, and Ray McMillan, a retired mortgage broker who is now a full-time real estate investor across multiple countries. Myself, I'm a financial advisor advising uh, business owners and families on how to retire properly with enough money and have enough insurance in place. So, today we're going to be diving into a topic that's more than just about a daydream. It's about a relocation and retirement and how to actually make it work for you. Retirement isn't just about saving anymore. It's about designing the life that you want, whether that's a beachside, a countryside, or just somewhere cheaper with cheaper groceries and less snow. So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to unpack the real talk behind the dream, including choosing the right destination, some of the financial realities of that, the healthcare surprises that you want to avoid, and the not so glamorous side of starting over. So, if you're thinking of making a move in your golden years, or even just planning ahead, what I want you to do is grab your notes, tune in, and let's help you retire smarter and live better. So, the first kind of talking point that I want to bring up is cost of living. That's where my mind goes when it thinking about retiring abroad. And how much cheaper does life need to be for it to be worth uprooting your life in Canada before you actually make that move? So we have our expert Ray McMillan here. And gentlemen, I just want to bring that conversation to you guys first of how much cheaper and what percentage wise or even dollar wise would it make sense for you to make that move to another country?
For me, it's more than just about the money. Um, you know, First, good morning, folks. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I hope you have that the next 45 minutes is enjoyable and informative. A lot of what I'm going to share with you is anecdotal from dealing with clients I've dealt with the last 30 years, and just from myself, my own transition. So to me, it's a little more than dollars and cents. It's about quality of life. And if anyone has lived in Toronto or New York and the colder parts of North America, you know as you start to age, when I say age, get past your 50s, those winters get a little dreary. They seem longer than usual. So for me, it was a transition to a place where I didn't have to worry about cold and dark um, too much. But when it comes to cost, your biggest cost in North America is housing. Even those who own their own homes are still faced with tremendous cost to own those homes. Living in a four-season environment, you're paying high utility costs all year round. In the cold months, you're paying for heat, and in the warm months, you're paying for air conditioning. So you never seem to stop paying for the home. The next thing you have to deal with is is property taxes. You know, the competition across North America today, both in the South in the US here and in parts of Canada, is you got this constant property tax increases. So your taxes can be anywhere from $4,000 a year to as much as eight or $10,000 a year, depending on the city you live in and the size of the home you're living in. Right? Then you got maintenance. In a four-season environment where you're dealing with the winter, spring, summer, and fall, you've got to maintain that home. Right? In the winter, you're shoveling snow and you're salting, and that coal and salt destroys your driveway. Then in the summer times, you're dealing with, watering your grass and the lawns and the tree pruning. Not to ignore the fact that you've got to deal with roof maintenance and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the weight of the snow in your home puts a heavy toll on the structure of your house, right? So those are some of the costs you look at. Now moving into, and I'm going to speak about the Caribbean. That's what I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with most parts of the Caribbean. We start from Jamaica right down to Guyana, right? So I've spent time in Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados, St. Lucia, and Guyana. So right. So those costs start to evaporate when you get into the Caribbean, right? Your property taxes are significantly lower. I can speak for Ghana, for example. The annual property tax in Ghana converts to about between 40 to 100 US a year for property taxes. Home insurance is about $100 a year, US dollars, right? Your utility costs is probably around the same thing. So if you look at what you're spending just on your home, then you are spending probably one less than 1/10 of what you would have spent if you had a paid off home in North America. So the cost is significantly less.
That's an awesome breakdown. So we're kind of shooting for, because when I look at it, I'm trying to thinking about it from a percentage just to keep it easy in my brain, looking before like a 60% reduction in living cost to make it worthwhile to move from Canada to another country, like you said, the Caribbean. So if we can get a 60% reduction in that, that's amazing. Just by changing our relocation into another place using our Canadian dollars.
Oh yeah. Oh man. I mean, your reduction would probably be somewhere around. And if you own your home in the Caribbean, you've got a family home that you renovated, or you built a home there. Like I mean, the relocation thing is a long-term plan. It's not a 5-minute decision. You have to start planning that transition somewhere in your mid 40s or your early 50s to do it effectively. The challenge we have is that most people get up one morning and think, okay, I'm tired of Canada. I want to go and live in Panama with no real plan, right? And you might run into a problem. So for me, because there was always a plan to transition. It wasn't something I just did spontaneously and just got up and left, right? So you've got to plan that process.
Speaking of planning, I would like for the audience to kind of get more of the nitty-gritty of how did it start? How did it commence from you to relocate to where you are in Florida, Jacksonville, and maybe touch on the kind of the storyboard on how you got there. I think that would be a great start there.
Yeah, Jacksonville, the U.S. was never my destination. I mean, I love being here now that I'm here, and I really enjoy being in the southern part of the U.S., but it was never my destination. My first option was the Caribbean. So in the early 2000s, a lot of my older Jamaican clients were going back to Jamaica. And Jamaica had its problems. There was crime, there was political unrest, there was all sorts of stuff in Jamaica during the early 2000s. And people were still coming from Jamaica to here. But at that point, they started building a lot of nice developments in Jamaica. And when you look at the prices comparative to what you had here in North America, the cost was significantly less to live there. I mean, you could have bought a condo in the north coast of Jamaica for 85,000 US, which is the cost of a higher end car in North America, right? And there were many builders who were building gated subdivisions with a lot of amenities across the island. So, Steph, I had a lot of Jamaican business associates over the years. So because of that, I spent a lot of time going to Jamaica with them. But there was never a connection to Jamaica. Jamaica is still a very high volume tourist island, and the focus to me was on tourism. So when you got there as a Black foreigner, for me there was a disconnect. So I liked going there, visit the island, but I couldn't picture myself living there. Like I didn't fit into it. I mean, I was always that Caribbean foreigner. I always got asked like, "Where are you from?" "Oh, you're Guyanese." "Okay." And then like the usual conversation. I had a Canadian business partner, as Stefan also knows. We did a lot of business in Barbados. Barbados is beautiful, but extremely expensive. Very expensive, and a little too tight for me. The culture was a little too uptight. I don't find, and no offense to anybody here from Barbados, I didn't find the place very relaxing. Again, very beautiful beaches. Um, East to travel, you got a lot of wide-bodied aircrafts because of a lot of transportation going between North America and Europe. It was very easy to get to Barbados and very, very inexpensive. So the cost of getting there was inexpensive, and then had all the infrastructure. Every major bank was in Barbados. They've got a very easy political climate. The currency exchange is very, very simple. It was a 2-to-1 between the Asian dollar and the US dollar. You can walk around very freely. You never felt unsafe. You don't have to worry about crime issues and that sort of stuff. But then again, it didn't click right. Then my dad is Grenadian, so my mom lives in Grenada, and I've been going there for quite a while. Um, and you know, Grenada is nice if I'm staying in a resort. You know, that when you live in North America, you get accustomed to a lot of things. You get accustomed to moving around very easily, very freely, tapping your bank card in a store. Going to the grocery store, find things you need. And when I got to Grenada, I normally stayed in St. George's. I didn't go beyond the island a whole lot. And I spent a month there one time, probably like around 6 weeks. And I rented a home on the north part of the island. And then I realized at that point that I couldn't stand the island. It was very difficult to move around Grenada. You know what I mean? Um, once we left St. George's, there was no banking infrastructure. There was one credit unit closed, I think, at 2 o'clock during the weekend, and was closed on Saturdays. None of the vendors took debit cards, so you always had to have cash on you. Um, the highway infrastructure is non-existent. So to get from St. George's to the north part of the island, which is about probably 20 miles, took almost 2 hours. And, no, I know I'm sounding like a very spoiled North America, right? But if you're trying to transition from what I would call a higher end North American lifestyle into the Caribbean, then there are going to be some things that you want to have. And you have to put in your list, what is it I want to enjoy when I get where I'm going? So at that point, I realized that no, Jamaica is not going to work. Barbados is not going to work. And Grenada is not going to work. So the next best option was the US, right? I mean, everybody talks of Florida. And when people think of Florida, most people think of Miami, Orlando, Tampa, St. Pete's, and that sort of stuff. I ended up in Jacksonville. And Jacksonville is a very different place. To most people, it's an unknown city. So it's a very large city by landmass and population. It's got extensive beaches, about 22 miles of beach. It's got 11 months, 3 weeks of summer. There's a hurricane season that is usually not very impactful here. But what was more important to me is that it was a very easy place to move around. It reminded me a lot of the Caribbean with all the infrastructure. So I've got these amazing highways. I've got all the restaurants I need. I've got all the clothing stores. The banking works. The Wi-Fi works. Everything works, right? So that was what made me roll down the list, and it took me 10 years to get where I wanted to go. And that's why I said before, you got to start planning this process in your 40s, and you got to go and spend time in these places on your list. Because if you don't spend a month in a destination, not in a hotel, go rent yourself a home that's an Airbnb, and just be part of that local community, and get up and walk to the market and see how the banking system works, and can you do a wire transfer from Canada to the Caribbean. And if those things don't work in your favor, then that's not the place for you. And then the other thing is language. So a lot of folks talk about going to Panama or going to Costa Rica or going to Colombia and all that kind of stuff. That's all great, but I don't speak Spanish, right? And I don't want to go somewhere where I got a language issue, So that was how Jacksonville became my destination.
Yeah, I could see that you narrowed down your list, and more importantly, I think people should take away from this that you actually went to these places and 10 toes down instead of seeing it on a reel or a video, and then you kind of haphazardly you just go there, just moving everything on a whim because someone said so. I think it's important to still visit these countries, spend a few weeks, not just stay in your hotel, your Airbnb, interact with the locals, because you learn a lot from the locals, and you can take away a lot from that.
Oh yeah, definitely, Stefan. I mean, like, and what I need to add to the conversation, I spent a lot of time in Guyana also. Guyana is my mother's birthland. And when I get off that plane in Guyana, it's home. No, I wasn't born there, but that's probably the only place in the world where I feel 100% comfortable. Now, Guyana has its challenges, and I've been going to Guyana now and spending a few months at a time there. Um, you know, probably since 2018, right? And they have the restrictions. I mean, you've got blackouts and banking issues and you know, bit of crime and all those kind of things. But for me, none of those things really bother me a whole lot because, I mean, those things were what the country was like when I left there 40 years ago, right? So if I'm gonna go somewhere with discomfort, right? I may as well go back where I got a real connection than going to some random country that I have no connection to and deal with their discomfort, which I have no investment in. You know what I mean? That's just my perspective.
Yeah, so just a quick recap of what I got from what your story that you just said is one, getting over the honeymoon phase of the country that you're thinking about retiring. I know a lot of people, clients that I've spoken to have said, I visited this place and fell in love with it. Um, but like you said, if you're not there long enough to get over that sweet honeymoon phase where everything is perfect and actually live there for a bit to know if you're going to be a fit. That's one thing that I took away from that conversation as well. And we just had a comment. He's like, from Kanyo, he said exactly trying to do banking, going to public hospitals, checking out the entertainment scene, and trying to get business done at government office. Internet connectivity and availability all are important things to think about. So again, we just wanted to open this up. This is a conversation. We want to open it up to you guys, whether through chat or whether you want to come off mute and ask your questions through the chat or verbally to us. We want you engaged in this conversation as well to kind of know what's important for you when you're kind of deciding on whether if you want to retire in another country or not.
And those are very great points that you made. You've got to know what it is that is important to you
Yeah.
when you're going someplace based on the stage of your life. So if you're trying to go back to the Caribbean and you still have business interests in North America, and you need to do regular bank transfers and you need access to high-speed internet and that kind of stuff, then you got to be very careful where you go. You know what I mean? And then you mentioned old romantic notion. Like I lived in St. Lucia for 2 years, and I always tell people it is the most beautiful place in the Caribbean, most beautiful, bar none. You go past places like Soufriere, you see the pitons and that sort of stuff, even the north part of the island. The island is amazingly beautiful. But I live there? No. It is extremely expensive to live in St. Lucia, right? Very, very expensive. And they also speak a French patois, which is the dialect of most of the locals in the market and that kind of stuff. So again, you got a nuance of language there again. You know what I mean? But it's a very expensive island, right? And if you look at the cost of hotels in St. Lucia, I mean, a 7-day trip to St. Lucia is like a $7,000 vacation. Well, if you go
Mhm.
to Jamaica for $2,000, so you got to look at those things also. And then the other thing you have to look at, and I guess you're going to get to this probably along the way, is the cost. As a Canadian, right? Everything in the Caribbean is tied to the US dollar. So your Canadian dollar, if you're coming from Canada, is not going to go as far as somebody's coming from America because everything is priced against the American dollar. You'll be very, very cognizant of that also.
So when we're getting into cost, and I kind of want to go into health. Well, back in the day, we used to rave about our healthcare system, how it was here in Canada, but now we're experiencing extremely long wait times for just basic procedures. But it's still going to be a factor when you're planning on retirement, especially in your older years when you're going to experience more health issues. You could be more injury prone. Things are going to happen to you as you get older. So for me, thinking about the healthcare options and kind of what has to be top of mind of the country that you're going to is what kind of care you're getting into. So can you just kind of touch on that a little bit from your experience of just how was it easy for you to, what kind of care did you get if anything happened in those other countries and, what it's really like in the US having a private healthcare system as opposed to what we have here in Canada?
I mean, in most of them, you've got a two-tiered system. You've got public healthcare and private healthcare. Now, you know, if money's not an object for you, then you have access to pay for the best healthcare wherever in the world you live, whether you live in Canada, US, or the Caribbean. If money is a challenge, then you will be forced to use the public healthcare system, which anywhere in the world you go is not of the greatest quality. There's wait times. I mean, I have I've had health issues all my life. I've got a sickle cell trait, so I know what it is to need healthcare. In my older years, I've started growing past, a lot of my sickle cell crises. Um, but healthcare is never a concern for me because apart from that, I have no other health issues, right?
Mhm.
Um, I have seen my mom have a accident in Grenada, and my sister and I, again, you pay to play. So I'm speaking now as a foreigner, right? I can't speak for a local person. And we're all foreign. We are relocating. I'm making the assumption anybody who's relocated to the Caribbean has had a relatively decent life in North America, and they've got some savings and some resources, so they can actually go back there and be relatively comfortable. Because there's no sense relocating to the Caribbean or any part of the world if you're going to struggle with even worse than where you came from. So my mom had an accident a few years ago, um, where she actually broke her arm. Now my mom at the time was in her, I think she was in her probably late 70s, close to 80. And she broke her arm right to the joint, which is one of the worst places to break your arm, right to her elbow. And she got great health care in Grenada, all public health care. And then my sister and I, who lives in the UK, we were able to hire a private nurse for her. Now, I don't know what a private nurse costs in Toronto, where you guys are, or anywhere in the US, but I'm pretty sure it's a pretty expensive process. And that private nurse probably cost my sister and myself probably $150 a week. And that nurse came in, I think, 5 or 6 hours a day, helped her with her meal prep, spent some time with her, keeping her company and that sort of stuff. I had some medical stuff done in Guyana probably 3 or 4 years ago. There was no wait time. When I compare the cost to what I had the same thing done here in North America, it could have been probably 100 times more it would have cost me. I had a great experience. The medical professionals were all American trained, um, so I didn't have that issue, right? You know, I think if you've got a chronic health issue where you need ongoing care to get through your day-to-day activity, then moving to the Caribbean might be a challenge for you. But if you've got, like I'm not diabetic, I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have any need to see a doctor more than once a year. So for me, it's not a concern. It's not a concern for me. I have no issue about lack of medical facilities. And now I know there's folks in this call here from the Caribbean, and they may disagree with me, but I mean, I'm sharing my perspective, not as a local resident, but as somebody who's relocating and who's spending U.S. earned income in that country. You know what I mean?
Yeah, those are great points you shared because I just saw another podcast where a well successful Kenyan lawyer, his mother was sick and he decided to take his mother to the US. And when he went to the US, it was highly expensive. Highly expensive, extremely long procedures, time waiting, to the point where he just ultimately went back to Kenya and they performed the surgery very successfully. So there's a lot of misconceptions with other countries that people believe, like Africa or parts of the Caribbean, that they lack the professionalism and knowledge within the healthcare system. So it's interesting that you mentioned those points earlier.
I mean, and everybody's experience is different. I mean, that might just be my experience. You know what I mean? Like I had to wait. I had to have a surgery back in 2018. It was a life altering, and it was supposed to be an emergency surgery. I had to wait, I think, 5 months for that surgery or 4 months for that surgery. Now, you know, I was in a position to go and hire a private physician and pay them tens of thousands of dollars to do the surgery. So I had to wait, right? And I mean, they're in the Caribbean has a different set of issues when it comes to how people are treated compared to North America. The primary issue in North America is usually race. The darker your melanin, the more challenges you have living in certain environments. In most of the Caribbean, you can talk from Jamaica right down to Guyana and Barbados and St. Lucia, I think included, you deal with class and status, right? So, I mean, if you are a certain class and status, then you probably have people in your circle who are certain professionals, and they would probably give you information, guidance, and time that the average layperson might not get. It's not right, But I mean, we're talking about people who relocate into the Caribbean. So you're in a whole different class and status than the average person who's living in the Caribbean, who's lived there all their life and never left. I mean, who has a very basic existence, right? I mean, there are people in the Caribbean who have like extremely great lifestyles, great professions, great jobs, and a lot of the challenges that the local residents face, they don't face it, right? But I mean, the health thing is a very valid concern. If you have serious health issues, you want to really consider how you want to navigate relocating if you are dependent on some sort of treatment that is covered by an insurance policy in North America.
Yeah, let's touch on, since we were speaking on the healthcare planning, I think the other topic we want to kind of dive into is unforeseen downsides. This touches more on when you relocate, typically you move away from your family, your friends, you experience some type of loneliness, I guess relocation fatigue. I just came up with that one. Uh, yeah, I want you to touch more on that to the audience because I think that's something that's not really spoken really about. Everyone just kind of speaks on it. Oh, just relocate. This is the grand place
Yeah,
to retire. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that is so true. I mean, Steph, you and I had this conversation a few days ago where I was talking like, man, Jacksonville is lonely, man. I'm very introverted. I'm what you call what's the word how you describe me? I'm an introverted extrovert. So if you and I hang, I can be very extroverted, because I get to connect with you. But I don't make friends very easily. I don't interact a lot very easily. I'm very, very quiet. I sort of look at things from the outside. So that is a serious challenge, leaving your family and friends behind, and if you're older, you're into your 60s or 70s, and you've got, kids, adult kids with grandchildren, and you move somewhere where, traveling will cost you money. You've got to consider, right? How often you're going to go back to your quote unquote home base, or how often they're going to come and visit you. You've left, I'm very close to my kids. We hang out a lot. Steph and I will drink a beer together on occasion. We might enjoy a cigar. We have lunch with his two siblings. And relocating, I have lost those things, right? So I haven't managed to find anything, but I can't because I can't replace my children, with new children, right? So I haven't managed to fill that void or anything else. So that's one of the challenges you have, and if you belong to, if you've got a social circle, you belong to a church community or your volunteer group. Like I had an aunt who moved from New York to Jacksonville, and I had to coax her to move from New York. I mean, New York is not for what people, man. I said, like, aunt, you got to move, man. Like, Florida's beautiful. And she's like, well, I got my whole social circle here. And I volunteered. I mean, she's an educational professional. She's got, many, many years of great education service throughout the Caribbean. And, she does a lot of volunteer work and that sort of stuff, within the local community. I think she was in Queens. And to convince her to move to Jacksonville, even though the weather here is a lot nicer, there's no need to jump on the subway and stuff in the freezing cold in January and February. It took a lot of convincing for her to get here. Now, she's been here now, I think, for 4 years. She's very extroverted. So she has a whole new network here of people, and she's got a new church and stuff like that. The other thing too is if you like certain types of entertainment. So as I said earlier, I go to Ghana a lot. I spend about 3 months a year in Guyana sometimes. And there's not a lot of entertainment for someone like me. I'm a avid sports fan. I find there's no soccer tournaments going on in Guyana. I don't see any basketball games. I'm a boxing fan. When I lived there, was a lot of boxing tournaments. I don't see any boxing. The theater is very limited. I've gone to a few events there at the theater. It was okay, but I didn't find it, it's not like going to watch the Phantom of the Opera here in North America, right? So I mean, so those things I found very, very lacking. So what do? You spend a lot of time at home, if you end up having friendships with people who just out of need, you wouldn't have normally had a a close friendship with, and you find yourself doing sometimes very mundane tasks. So for me, it's spend a lot of time outside doing a lot of yard work. I find projects in the home to do, keep me busy. I run, walk, that kind of stuff. I get up and do, a couple of kilometers every single day, keep myself fit. And then I find out hobbies, and I got back into my vinyl collecting and playing, music on my turntable, and that lets the time go by. But yeah, it can be a real challenge moving from your entire support group into a whole new environment where you don't really know a whole lot of people. If you have family, I mean, if you left the country 40 years ago and you've got a cousin you grew up with when you were 10 years old, I mean,
Those are
that's like a
different.
total stranger. That's a total stranger to you. You know what I mean? You
Mhm.
go back there and like, man, who's this Negro, man? I don't want this guy around me too much. You know what I mean? So it might, and sometimes it's better to stay far from the family you have behind and actually get too close to them because their reality is totally from yours. That can become very, very wearisome having to deal with their issues that aren't really your issues. When you've left that country 40 or 50 years ago.
You just brought up an interesting point because let's say, for instance, you left the country that you lived or born in, and it was been 40 years. Then you come back and you amass this success, this North American success. You come back, your family members see this.
Presumed success.
Yeah,
Let's get
yeah.
that
That's
right.
why
There's
there's
a
air
there's a
quotations.
level of presumption also that we're all successful. We all got a whole big bag of gold in our back. When we coming back to the Caribbean, we can buy the whole
Yeah,
country.
yeah.
It's a presumed success. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so yeah, that was the air quotations if people didn't have their video on, but yeah, that presumed success. You kind of face those challenges with family members, friends, and then the hands start coming out, and then it can become daunting after a while. And that's a great point. I never really thought of that consideration when you relocate to a place where you were born or lived in, and you still have living family members and
Oh yeah,
friends. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's very tiresome. I mean, and that's my experience in Guyana. Like I always tell people, I love being in Guyana because I can leave when I get tired of the nonsense. So I love being there. But when I get tired of it, I just tell I just listen, I need to get out of here. And I'm on the first flight out. But to be there and not be able to leave when I want to come back to Florida, I don't think I can spend my entire life living anywhere in the Caribbean. For me, the Caribbean is great because I can leave, and that goes to Grenada also. I go there, I spend time with my mom, but I have the ability when I get tired of that environment to leave. You know what I mean? So when I talk about relocated, you know, I think if you're going to sever ties completely with North America, and if you have a family here, that's very, very difficult to do. If you've got your children and grandkids here, that's not the easiest thing to do, sever ties completely. But if you're gonna sever ties completely, you'll be very careful with that, because I mean you can get there, and the first year may be all nice and rosy. You going back and see places you never saw. I mean, these countries have amazing histories, right? I mean, Ghana, for example, is a massive country. You can spend time going into the interior and watch, you know, the waterfalls and the rainforests and the savannas, and there's much to see in that country. But then once you finish doing that, you know what I mean? What's next for you, right? And you're correct. I mean, I left Ghana when I was in my 20s, so I have a lot of people I knew there. Um, Both guys I played soccer with, guys I played basketball with, and a lot of them are still there. And I don't recognize some of them; they recognize me. And there's not a day that goes past when I walk around the city that I don't bump into somebody who recognizes me. And you always got to think, okay, where's this conversation going to go? Like, what do you want from me? Like there's always there's a feeling of need from some individuals, depending on where their lives have taken them. And that's not everybody, but I mean, some folks are in that situation. There's a question here on the Instagram. We were also live on Instagram, just for those who are watching us this morning. Thank you very much for spending your time with us. I know I'm sharing a lot with you guys. If you got any questions, just ask us. One of my colleagues here has a question on Instagram about my thoughts on Antigua. Um, I always say the Caribbean, they're all the same. Antigua, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica. You land a blindfold on one of those islands, they ain't much different. I mean, they're all a couple of square miles. They've got nice beaches. They've got great sunshine. Some are in the hurricane zone, so you gotta be careful with the hurricane stuff. Some are not. Some are not. I mean, some of them it costs a little more to live in some of them than others. Antigua is one of the more expensive islands to live in. Um, there's not a lot of food grown locally in Antigua because of the type of soil. And that's the other thing you got to worry about also. Food and the cost of food. So some islands like Grenada, St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent, Jamaica, they grow a lot of food locally. So depending on how you eat, your eating bills will drop significantly moving back to parts of the Caribbean, right? Places like Antigua and Barbados, the soil there is all like sand and limestone, and there's not a lot of stuff going on there. A lot of stuff is imported, and a lot of stuff comes up from the U.S. actually. So your food can cost you a lot more in some of those islands than actually costs you in North America, because nothing much is really grown there. I mean, you may get a lot of seafood because you're surrounded by water, but apart from that, everything that you eat will come from North America. Now, a place like Guyana, right? And I didn't mention Trinidad because I haven't spent a lot of time in Trinidad as an adult. I went there last as a young child. I think the last time I was there was, coming to probably about 20 years ago. But Trinidad is also an amazing place. But yeah, you got to really consider that. So, and Guyana has you can find every single. No Guyanese should go hungry. You know what I mean? If you eat, a lot of natural, fresh food, fresh vegetables and stuff like that. And if you live outside of Georgetown, then definitely you should not be worrying about food in Guyana, man. If you're in Georgetown, like any big city, you'll have your challenges if you're not in the right income bracket.
I think we have a question from Koyo. Sorry, apologize me if I mispronounce your name, but curious about your views on the reverse movement, leaving the Caribbean and relocating to North America to retire. What are the considerations?
I think that's insanity. I mean, pardon my blunt. I think I don't see why anybody would want to leave, a nice mild temperature, particularly if you don't have any health issues. If you got serious health issues where you need to get some kind of treatment and medication and stuff like that, and you've got family who can get you an insurance in North America, that's one. But I mean, to leave the Caribbean in my 60s and move to North America to retire, like, I mean, why would I do that? I mean, it's, I mean, you leave the Caribbean to come to North America and England to seek your fortune, right? As Louise Bennett said it in her poem back in the 60s, colonization in reverse. You know what I mean? You leave there to go and seek your fame and fortune. I mean, you made your fame and fortune, you take it back to the place that your ancestors came from, and you put that money back there. But I mean, if I never left the Caribbean and I had my career in the Caribbean, my business in the Caribbean, I could not see myself leaving North America, leaving the Caribbean to come to anywhere in America to live. I mean, having lived comfortably all my life. Now, I know there's a lot of political issues in some places, and some people are, that can be the reason in some cases. But I mean, that's just my opinion. I just don't see it as a move I would make at any point in my life once I've gone past the age of 45. I think migrating is for young people, and I think, I mean, you guys are both in the financial services space, so you know what happens to people who move to North America later in their life. They never catch up, right? They're always spinning their wheels. They can't afford to buy a house. These are in Toronto. It's hard for them to afford to buy a proper home in Toronto. You come in there older. If you got a pension from the Caribbean, you convert it into American to US dollars. It's not a whole lot. Now, if you had bought assets in North America all your life while living in the Caribbean, you got a stock portfolio, you've got real estate, you had your company was global if you have your own business. That may be an option, but to be a regular employee leaving the Caribbean and coming to North America to retire, I just don't see it as a prudent move based on the cost of living in North America.
I would agree with you on that. I work with quite a few immigrants, and they quickly realize that it's not it. Like the dream that they thought was going to be in North America is not it. Unless they have a strong family structure already set up here that they can move in and seamlessly make that transition. But I totally agree with you. Going in reverse is extremely difficult for most immigrants
Yeah.
doing that. But I want to touch on just the mindset a little bit of sometimes you kind of mentioned it a little earlier on what we're used to living here. So we usually when we're planning on leaving here, we're trying to leave baggage, leave stresses. But sometimes we carry those things and expectations with us to the new country. So what kind of advice would you give? Would it be to try to find as as close as a match as you could in that new country that you lived here? Or should you be going there with the mindset of, you know what, everything should be new, fresh, no expectations really, like kind of just on the mindset of what you should be thinking about when you go into that new country of trying to match or go in with a fresh mindset?
Nah, if you're trying to match your lifestyle and your conveniences here in the Caribbean, you're doomed to fail and have a very stressful experience. So if that's your game plan, then stay where you are. You will have a very difficult time relocating anywhere in the Caribbean. I don't care which island you go to, whether it's Barbados, whether it's Jamaica, whether it's St. Lucia, whether it's Guyana. Guyana's not an island, we're in South America, but still, do not go there with your North American airs and graces. First of all, you're going to annoy people because all you're gonna do is complain about stuff. Oh, well, it's different here and it's better here. Listen, if it's not better where you come from, then you should stay where you are. Don't come back here. I'm gonna share a story with you guys. So, Stef, I used to go to my mom and grade a lot, right? And I had my own business for almost 30 years. So I'm always on the clock. I've got all, well, no, I'm not a techno freak, but I had all the technology. You know, I had the world phone and all that crap way back in the early 2000s. Like wherever I go in the world, my phone used to ring and I get emails and texts and all that stuff. Long before there was iPhone, I had the technology, man. You know, I bought all the gadgets. And I used to go to Grenada to my mom very often. You know, I'd go and spend Christmas in Grenada with her and that kind of stuff. And my mom is very laid back, you know what I mean? She's a language teacher. She taught most of her life. She paints, she writes poetry, you know what I mean? She lives very simply. And she's always like, Ray, you're always so wound up. What's wrong with you? Relax, you know what I mean? This is about 21 years ago. And I said, man, I got a business to run. She said, like, you're gonna kill yourself. So backstory, my dad died from a heart attack when he was 50, right? So I was stressed out, you know, like, man, I don't want that heart attack before I'm 50. So I was in my 40s, I used to try to manage my stress. And I was not very good at it. I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, managing our stresses. Like, I'm the worst. I'm like, man, nothing in life bothers me anymore. I get a nice cold beer, I get my cigar, and the world can blow up, and I'm good. Once I got my beer and my cigar, you know what I mean? So not a lot bothers me anymore. But back then, I used to be really wound up. Because you're all thinking with your next dollar, closing your next deal, and all that kind of stuff. And the more successful I got, the more I kept on amped up about it. So I'm there, and my mom says, here we need to do it. When you get off that plane, take your watch off your hand. Because every 2 seconds, I've been in line at the bank, and every minute I look at my watch, trying to think, man, I'm in the line at the bank for 15 minutes, and nothing, I'm still in the same spot. She says, take your watch off your hand and just go with the flow. And that was 20 something years ago. And that's probably one of the best pieces of advice my mother's ever given me. I think she saved my life by doing that. So what I'm saying to you, when you land in Guyana, you know, like Guyana, like I'm a minibus user when I go to Guyana. And everybody's like, I take a taxi. I love the chaos of the minibus. It connects me to the country and the people. A taxi is so isolated. I walk into the corner, and first of all, the minibus costs like 10 cents compared to taking a taxi, which is going to cost like probably $10, right? So I walk into the
No
corner.
cheaper than here.
Oh man, it's a lot cheaper. Jump in the minibus, you know, it's chaos, it's loud, but there's a connection for me, right? But yeah, if you are going to be constantly comparing um, whatever life you've lived in North America, and we have a lot of comfort in this part of the world, man. Like, you know, we don't get blackouts here unless there's a major issue going on. You know, the snow falls, they shut your road at least a day or two later. You know, you want your car service, you go through a drive-through oil change place and your oil is changing fast. Like, think of the conveniences you have here that we take for granted. You know, you take a car back to the Caribbean, it might be a European car or a Japanese car, you got to find somebody you really can depend on to service your car for you and do it properly. You know, like it might sound like a little thing.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to get to this question before we
Mm.
have to jump off because it's
Yeah.
a really good question. It's from Rhonda, and she's saying, I'm
Okay.
considering retiring in Florida for its convenience and access to Guyana, with plans to own a few acres for farming and water access. How can I realistically plan for climate change risks and rising costs like food and insurance?
I don't think any of us can plan for climate change risk. That's the
I'm sorry,
governmental
just to
response.
interrupt, that should be with rising costs like flood insurance.
Like flood, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we can't really plan for the climate change risks. We need government intervention there, even the cost of the insurance. I mean, insurance costs is a huge factor here in Florida. And the cost is more the hurricane season than anything else. I mean, like, we don't live in the hurricane path, so to speak. We had our roof damaged last year during the hurricane. Hurricane season started a week ago, and we still haven't gotten our roof fixed. We lost a few shingles, and we still haven't had our roof fixed as yet, you know. But I mean, Florida's flat. That's the first thing you've got to be very, very aware of. The entire state is flat. The highest elevation is probably 10 feet if it's that high. So, I mean, flooding is part of life here. So, I mean, if flooding is a concern, and one of the things that going to determine where you move, then Florida is not the place. Having said that, land is very cheap in Florida. Properties are very cheap, but not cheap, inexpensive. Let me use the correct word when compared to other parts of the U.S. You know, you can get pieces of acres of land, particularly when you move away from the coastline, relatively inexpensively. I mean, you can get 3 acres of land, urban land, residential land, for probably $100,000. I'm pretty sure farmland will cost you a lot less. But if you want to combine, if you're moving here with the intention of, you know, trying to plant your own stuff, then you have to move into probably more remote areas further away from urban cities. So you've got to figure out, you got to put your list of, well, what are my top 10 things? And then you go down that list. So if flying to Guyana is one of your top 10 things to do, then we're going to be able to fly to Guyana easily, and we'll be able to farm and buy land inexpensively and pay lower insurance costs. Those two things don't correlate. Because you fly into Guyana frequently, then you got to be somewhere close to either Orlando, Miami, or Fort Lauderdale and Tampa, right? That's where you're going to be able to get to Guyana. Like where I am in Jacksonville, flying to Guyana is a pain. I usually fly from Jacksonville to New York, then back to Guyana. And Stefan always asked me why. Well, I don't like flying to Miami because the airport is chaos. So I'd rather fly up north and fly back down south. So I'm going to spend another 4 hours of my flight just to avoid the chaos of flying to Miami because there's language issues and just total chaos flying to Miami airport. So you've got to put your list of the top 10 things down and then figure out which of those you can really adjust. Now, we're hoping that going forward, the state government gets involved in insurance costs and we can stabilize those insurance costs because that's putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people, particularly people who are retired. You're in a fixed income, you know your pension is not changing, but every year your insurance cost is changing. And what happens in those situations? A lot of people who have paid off homes stop insuring their homes, or they try to reduce the amount of coverage they have. You don't want to do that because if there's a fire, then you've got a challenge now where you've got lost assets and you have no money to replace them. So, but I think having a conversation with somebody and going through the pros and cons and the things I need and the things I don't need will probably help you make a better decision. But Florida's flat, so with global change and global warming, we will see the incidents of flooding in many parts of Florida and many parts of the Caribbean also. I mean, Guyana, the entire coastline of Guyana is 6 feet below sea level, and that's a real concern in Guyana. I read an article a few days ago. We were speaking of that. So I think even in Guyana, they need to start considering moving a lot of their infrastructure, talking government and banking and all the other stuff, away from the coastline, because the seas rising is a very real thing. It's not going to stop.
Yep, climate change is very real. Thank you, Rhonda, for that question. And again, great points shared. I think we're almost reaching that mark. Anyone wants to drop something before we go? I know we kind of dead stop, but we can kind of open the floor for questions, thoughts.
Yeah, this was a great audience, actually. I appreciate Rhonda's comments. I've got a lot of familiar faces I've seen on the call. I want to thank them for joining. I know Jeremy and Kunya I've known since in high school. Jedediah is a mentee of mine. Dr. Webb is my good colleague. There's a few faces I don't know who they are, but thank you very much for joining. I hope you found what I shared insightful. Andrew always says I'm a great storyteller. I share my life journey, a lot of anecdotes. But yeah, I love living in Toronto. I love being there. Toronto is an amazing city. The cold never bothered me, but Steph can tell you 2 things bothered me: dirty snow and salt in my car. Those two things annoyed me. I got a great coat collection, so I just throw on my sheepskin and I go out there and deal with the weather.
In your bougie shoes.
But I like, yeah, man. But I like my car clean. I like my shoes clean, you know. And Toronto, man, I couldn't do that, man. Like 6 months a year, I got tiptoe to get to my car, and I got tired of that stuff. And then the darkness. As I got older, um, you know, I found the darkness started to bother me. You know, I get to the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's dark, and I'll be in my office. And I mean, Steph knows about this. You know, I started telling him, like, you know, when he finished college and we started to work together. Just stuff like, I can't deal with this darkness, man. Like, I can't, you know, like I was up this morning at 6 o'clock out in the park doing my 5K, my 6K actually, you know what I mean? And I had my sunglasses on, right? You can't wear sunglasses at 6 o'clock in the morning in Toronto, you know what I mean? Like, that's not gonna happen. I saw a question there about expat groups. Can you read a question for me?
More of a comment.
Yeah.
Comment?
Cheryl Lynn. There are meetup groups and expats who also provide good information to share based on where and when you are trying to relocate. So along that line, do your research. A lot of groups out there.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of groups.
Thank you, Dr.
What I found from my experience, a lot of the groups were not people of Caribbean background, particularly in Florida. So, you know, a lot of that they focused on wasn't really, like, I belong to 2 Canadians in Florida Facebook groups, and 3/4 of their conversation is just stuff that I have no interest in. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, if I want a nice West Indian spot, I get a good steamed fish. They can't tell me that. You know what I mean? Or where can I drink a red stripe? Or we got a nice patio, or, you know, they can share stuff that is very generic. Going to the Caribbean, though, that's a lot different. There's a lot of expat groups, for Jamaicans going back to Jamaica and Guyanese going back to Guyana and that sort of stuff. So yes, that's a really good resource. People share their experience. I mean, we do a conversation on my alumni association website once every 2 months. And we spoke of that last week. I was one of the participants. And one of the questions they posed was crime, you know what I mean? And while crime is a concern, it wasn't a deterrent for me, because most crime, even in North America, like the way you look at suburban crime, is crime of opportunity. If you leave yourself exposed, then somebody's going to take the chance and do something. Like, you know, in Toronto, you leave your car outside, it might get stolen, right? Because car theft is very, very prevalent in Toronto, right? And same thing in Caribbean. When you import stuff into the Caribbean, you gotta be very careful you dispose of your boxes and that kind of stuff. You know, when you know you got 2 65-inch TVs in your house, then, you know, your house is not properly secured, then they may want to come and collect them from you. You know what I mean? So you be very careful you dispose. There's actually a Jamaican colleague of mine, a woman who wrote a book about how to relocate to Jamaica safely. It's probably in the office, Steph, on the bookshelf. You should look for it. And she made some very, I know we've gone over 11 o'clock, and I know we usually tell our clients don't want to go, but I want to share this before we wrap it up. There's something you have to be very careful of going back to the Caribbean, that people who live there don't really pay attention to little things like if you want to hire somebody to clean, you know, like do your yard maintenance, you want to get a referral from someone who, you know, you can trust that person, somebody to come into your home to do cleaning, like who cleans your home and that sort of stuff, if you can't do it yourself or you just don't want to do it yourself. Referral. Rhonda, I saw, made another comment about people selling their Florida homes. That's like another laughable comment to me. Like, I mean, that's like the news everywhere. You know, I mean, first of all, condo living in most of Florida is a very small percentage of people. So while they may want to sell their home, I don't think there's anybody looking to buy them. So they're gonna be stuck here for a while, because, I mean, you know, I personally wouldn't buy a condo in Florida now when the condo fees are $600 to $1,000 a month. But I think there's this news circulating that every Canadian is planning to migrate and leave to Florida and move back to Canada. That is not an accurate statement. You know, I mean, there's a lot of news, quote unquote, floating around that Florida is about to implode and everybody's going to leave and head to somewhere else. But that is not true. there are people moving to this state and city that I in every single day. I don't want to quote the exact number, but I know there's a few hundred people a week moving to Jacksonville every single week. And I'm pretty sure that the number moving down to South Florida is a lot more, because it's still one of the most inexpensive states to live in. And you still got a better quality of life in Florida compared to most other parts of the US. Probably the Carolinas might be a good option, North and South Carolina. Texas is great, but it's very, very hot. And then you still got wind in most of Texas. So Florida is still your best route. So the numbers of people selling here I think it's very inflated in the news, and I would question those numbers.
I think that would wrap everything, folks. This was a great conversation. That's for everyone today. Thank you for joining us for Relocation and Retirement with a special guest, Ray McMillan. We hope you walk away with something to think about, something to act on, and something to grow from. If you like what you heard, you can always subscribe and join on our social media presence. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, we're on it. If you stay tuned, the next month's episode is July 9th, same time, Wednesday, 10:15 in the morning. And that's about lifestyle creep, the tendency of spending increases while your income rises. Until next time, keep investing in yourself and your well-being. And thank you for everyone joining us today.
And for all the fathers in the call, I want to wish you guys a happy Father's Day. I know Father's Day is but this Sunday coming, so to all the dads in the group, wish you a happy Father's Day, man.
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers there.